Enter a world where reality warps and fear feels familiar. Each eerie tale blurs the line between nightmare and truth, inviting you to explore the strange, the supernatural, and the psychologically twisted. Dim the lights and take a glimpse into madness. Privacy of thought is mankind's last true sanctuary, the final frontier where we can be perfectly honestly ourselves. In the hills of Appalachia, where secrets are currency and silence is golden, what happens when that sanctuary is violated by something that fell from the stars? This is tonight's Glimpse into Madness. Sheriff Merle Stokes had always believed that silence kept the peace in Hollow Branch. 23 years wearing the badge had taught him that much. He was patrolling the outer roads on a crisp Tuesday night when the sky split open. A blinding streak of blue-white fire tore across the blackness, dragging a tail of sparks that illuminated the hills like daylight for 3 impossible seconds. Merle watched, mouth slightly agape, as the meteor disappeared behind Crowley Ridge with a distant boom that vibrated through his chest. "Well, ain't that something?" he muttered, turning his cruiser toward Jeb Crowley's property. Not that he was concerned. Just checking, as any good sheriff would. The Crowley homestead was intact when he arrived. Jeb stood on his porch, scratching his gray stubbled chin and staring toward the woods behind his property. "Everyone all right?" Merle called, stepping from his vehicle. "What the heck was that?" Jeb replied. "Sounded like a bomb." Merle shook his head. "Not a bomb, Jeb. It was a meteorite. I saw it from the highway. Thought I'd check in on you." Jeb frowned. "A what?" Merle smiled. Jeb was a nice guy, but probably didn't make it past the 9th grade. "A rock from outer space. It happens sometimes. Nothing to worry about." Jeb nodded, pretending to understand the sheriff. "Golly, outer space, you say?" He stroked his stubble again. "Better check on my still." Making moonshine wasn't illegal. Heck, in these parts, most everyone made at least a small batch for their own pleasure. Things got trickier if you tried selling it, but lawmen in these parts were used to looking the other way when it came to these things. "Might give your next batch some extra kick," Merle joked. Jeb's eyes widened. "Wouldn't that be something? Space hooch!" They shared a chuckle before Merle climbed back into his cruiser. 3 days later, Merle sat across from Mayor Harold Buchanan in the town hall's cramped office. The mayor was a round man with small, darting eyes that never quite met yours when money was the topic. "I hate to keep bringing it up, Mayor, but the East Bridge is getting worse by the week. If I gotta shut it down for public safety, folks will have to drive 20 miles further to get to the city. That's gonna tick off a lot of people," Merle explained. Now, the mayor replied, waving pudgy fingers dismissively. "Times are tight, Sheriff. The budget's stretched thin as gossamer." Merle nodded slowly. "Just that Bill Jenkins mentioned you approved funding for that new shopping center entrance, and that's less pressing than—" "Different allocation," the mayor snapped. "Apples and oranges." Merle watched the mayor's practiced smile as he took in the politician's double talk, but was unable to do anything about it. He'd heard whispers about the mayor's brother-in-law getting the contract as a favor, but proving it? That was another matter entirely. Besides, what good would the truth do? Just cause more division in a town already split along a dozen invisible lines. "Understood," Merle said, though he didn't. It had been a week since the meteor impact when the call came in. Dispatch's voice crackled over the radio, tense and hurried. "Sheriff, we've got a situation at Jeb's joint. Multiple reports of fighting, property damage. Sounds like the whole place is tearing itself apart." Merle flipped on his lights and siren. As far back as he could remember, there had never been more than a 2-person scuffle at Jeb's establishment. The locals knew better. He could hear the chaos before he even entered. Glass breaking, furniture splintering, voices rising in an unholy chorus of accusation and revelation. "I can't believe you've been sleeping with my wife for 3 years, one man shouted. "How did you know about the church fundraiser money?" a puzzled woman demanded. "Who told you about my real daddy?" another man screamed. Merle pushed through the door and froze. The inside of Jeb's joint looked like a hurricane made of fists and furniture had torn through it. 15 or 20 locals, people who'd shared this bar peacefully for decades, were locked in a bizarre melee. Blood spattered across wooden surfaces, bodies tumbled over upended tables. But it wasn't the fighting that stopped Merle cold. It was the accusations. "Don't even think about hitting me with that bottle, Joe," Old Man Peterson shouted at Joe Wilkins, who indeed was reaching toward a broken bottle with murderous intent. Joe's face went pale. "How did you? And you're thinking I'm a cheating bastard who's been fixing poker games every Thursday," Peterson continued, backing away. Across the room, Martha Chester slapped her husband while screaming details of an affair he'd never told anyone about, but was apparently thinking of at that very moment. Meanwhile, Reverend Phillips was huddled in a corner, sobbing as three outraged parishioners recited his private doubts about Scripture back to him, word for perfect word. Merle fired his revolver into the ceiling. The sharp crack silenced the room. "Everybody freeze," he bellowed. They did, breathing hard, bleeding freely, staring at each other with wild-eyed horror. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here?" Merle demanded. 20 pairs of eyes blinked back at him in confusion. Finally, Jeb Crowley spoke up from behind the remains of his bar. "Don't rightly know, Sheriff. I can usually sort out the fights we get. Heck, you know how people get when they get a little of my shine in them." This was different. Everyone got real quiet-like, staring at each other. Next thing, they're shouting what everyone else is thinking before they can even say it. Merle's gaze fell to the glasses on the bar. "What's different?" Jeb shrugged. "Same stuff I always make. Heck, this is the clearest shine I ever made, if I'm being honest. Tested it myself yesterday. Didn't hurt me none." As Merle began the process of restoring order and arresting the worst offenders, Bart Timmons, a quiet man with a now broken nose, grabbed his sleeve. "You think this is over?" Bart muttered through bloody, broken teeth. "Just wait till everyone realizes what we can hear." By the following night, word had spread about the fighting and the special shine. In a town as sleepy as Hollow Branch, this kind of excitement was hard to come by. Merle had warned Jeb not to serve any more of the batch until he could figure out what was going on. But when he arrived at Jeb's joint shortly after sunset, the place was packed to the rafters. Hollow Branch residents, normally so careful with their thoughts, were lining up 3 deep at the bar. Each one laid down cash for a glass of the crystal-clear liquid. Each one took a seat and waited, watching their neighbors with naked anticipation. Merle shouldered his way to the bar. "Jeb, I thought we had an understanding." Jeb shrugged helplessly. "They all asked for it special, Sheriff. They're all convinced it lets you read minds or something." Merle hissed, "You don't think that's a problem? That's why the good Lord buries them inside our skulls." But it was too late. The first drinkers were already starting to tremble, their eyes widening as they turned to their companions. Suddenly they were answering questions that hadn't been asked out loud, reacting to insults that had only been thought, backing away from desires that had never been spoken. Within an hour, the brawl made the previous nights look like a church picnic. Merle called in every deputy he had, even the ones who were off duty. When the dust settled, he confiscated every bottle of Jeb's moonshine he could find, loaded them into his cruiser, warned Jeb that next time would mean jail, but the damage was done. Over the next few days, Hollow Branch began to unravel. The Mitchells, married 38 years, filed for divorce after she took one sip and heard what he really thought about her mother. The First Baptist Church, attendance was down by half. People were too embarrassed to show their faces. Those who did show up were careful to not sit so close just in case they knew something. 3 members of the town council resigned after their indiscretions became known. Through it all, people couldn't get enough truth. Dozens showed up at Jeb's place, offering 20 times the usual price for a bottle. Those who'd tasted it craved more. Those who hadn't needed to know what all the fuss was about. Jeb sold them bottles, but the new batch didn't have the same kick. It was just shine. 2 days later, Bill Jenkins burst into the station house, red-faced and sweating. Merle nearly threw him out. "It's the mayor," Bill shouted before Merle could speak. "Him and his brother-in-law. I overheard them talking in the diner. They've been taking kickbacks on every contract for a decade, using the money to buy up foreclosed properties, then selling them back to the town at double the price." Merle stared at him. "How do you know that?" Bill's face was getting redder the more he thought about it. "I was over at Emma's having lunch. I asked him outright. He so much as confessed," Bill explained. "What exactly did the mayor say?" Bill seemed flabbergasted. "I confronted him, and he said it was none of my business." Merle smiled a bit. That's not exactly a confession, Bill. Bill seemed even more shocked. It sure as hell isn't a denial. It took a while for Merle to calm Bill Jenkins down, then promised to look into it. After Bill left, Merle sat alone in his office. He stared at the box of confiscated moonshine bottles. The crystal-clear liquid seemed to glow faintly even in the shadow of the cardboard. Merle had been suspicious of Harold Buchanan for years. He was the only man in town who seemed to get a little bit richer every year, but nothing obvious ever came to light. 23 years of looking the other way were over. Silence keeps the peace, Merle had always believed. But what if the peace was just a pretty lie? Merle reached for a bottle. He found Mayor Buchanan in his office, hastily packing documents into a briefcase. Going somewhere? Merle asked from the doorway. The mayor startled, nearly dropping the papers. Merle? Just organizing some records. Spring cleaning, you know. But what Merle heard was entirely different. God, it's the sheriff. Does he know? Did someone talk? I need to get these papers to the incinerator before. Merle stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He removed his hat and placed it on the desk, then leaned casually against the wall. Nice morning, he said mildly. Beautiful day, the mayor agreed with a forced smile. Though I'm swamped with work, perhaps we could catch up later this... Merle interrupted. The Westridge Shopping Center. Tell me about it. Mayor Buchanan's face remained pleasantly neutral. What about it? Standard development project, bringing jobs to... Merle shook his finger at the mayor. Your brother-in-law's making a pretty penny on that deal, Merle continued smoothly. And you're getting... what? 20%? The mayor's eyes bulged. That's an outrageous accusation. I would never... Merle's eyebrows shot up. 25%, Merle corrected himself. Pardon me. The color drained from Harold Buchanan's face. I don't. What followed was the most disturbing hour of Merle's life. The corruption he'd suspected was just the surface. With each probing question, Merle heard not just the mayor's stammered denials, but the panicked thoughts behind them, a swamp of petty cruelties, secret hatreds, and desires that made Merle's skin crawl. Not just crimes against the town, but thoughts no human being should ever hear from another. The mayor grew increasingly frantic as Merle calmly responded to thoughts he hadn't spoken aloud. His eyes bulged. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Stop, the mayor finally whimpered. Just stop. Stop what? Merle asked innocently. We're just having a conversation, Harold. The mayor's eyes darted around the room, desperately trying to avoid Merle's gaze. Merle's face hardened. You imagined what now? The mayor backed away, trembling. I didn't... My wife, Harold? Merle advanced on him, fists clenched. Please, the mayor sobbed. Please, I can't control my thoughts. No one can. It's not fair. It's not fair. Merle stopped, the anger suddenly draining from him. He looked at the pathetic figure cowering before him and realized a terrible truth. The mayor was right. No one could control their thoughts, not completely, and no one should have to. He turned and walked out, leaving Harold Buchanan collapsed in his chair, broken by the violation of his final privacy. The following morning, Merle walked into Jeb's joint. The place was nearly empty. Those few present sat in corners, avoiding each other's eyes. The memory of what had happened still echoed between them. Jeb looked up as Merle approached the bar. His face was haggard. Morning, Sheriff, he said quietly. Quite a week, huh? Merle nodded. Quite a week. Everything back to normal, Jeb? Jeb nodded at the quiet of the bar. Back to normal. Buy you a drink? Regular batch? Jeb added hurriedly. From before the space rock. Merle smiled faintly. Thanks, but I'm still on duty, he said with disinterest. Outside, Merle stopped on the porch of Jeb's joint. Morning sunlight cut through the mist hanging over Main Street. He could see the town stirring reluctantly to life, people moving carefully around each other, afraid of what thoughts might be overheard. He pulled a small hip flask from his coat, the one he'd refilled from his confiscated stash. He took a quick sip, feeling the familiar burn down his throat, feeling the heightened awareness it brought. Merle capped the flask with quiet resolve, adjusted his badge, squinted down Main Street at his transformed world, because silence no longer kept the peace in Hollow Branch. Only knowing the truth could do that now. Consider the burden of perfect perception, to hear not just what is said, but what is thought. In Hollow Branch, a celestial visitor bestowed the power to pierce mankind's final veil, leaving a lawman to navigate a world where privacy exists only in the absence of curiosity.